Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. Today, we're taking a look at this article called The 11 Best Purchases to Make in Your 20s. And some of these honestly surprised me.
Yeah, it's not your typical, treat yourself kind of advice, right?
Yeah.
It's more about how to set yourself up for long-term financial freedom, really thinking ahead. I'm excited to break some of this down and give everyone a little bit of extra context.
Yeah, I'm excited too. So you read through this entire article, 11 different things to buy in your 20s.
Uh-huh.
Were there any that stood out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first one that really caught my eye was the idea of buying the economy.
Buying the economy. What does that even mean?
So at first it does sound a little bit vague, but what they're really talking about is investing in index funds. Specifically something like the S&P 500.
Okay, I've heard of that,
Right.
but I'm not really sure what it is.
Yeah, so basically think of the S&P 500 as a collection of the 500 biggest companies in the US, publicly traded companies. So when you invest in an S&P 500 index fund, you're essentially buying a tiny little ownership stake in all those companies.
So instead of picking individual stocks, you're just saying I want to ride the wave of the entire U.S. economy.
Exactly. And historically, that's been a really smart bet. I mean, the S&P 500 has an average annual return of about 10% over the last century. So that basically means if you invested $100 on average, it would grow to $110 a year later.
So every year, 10% like clockwork.
Well, not necessarily clockwork.
Okay.
I mean, it is a long-term average, right? So some years are going to be better than others. You're going to have times when the market dips a little bit.
Sure.
The key is to stay invested for the long term, and you ride out those fluctuations.
This is kind of like the tortoise and the hare.
Precisely.
Slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah, and that's why this approach is so good, especially for someone in their 20s, because time is on your side. The earlier you can start putting away even small amounts of money to let that money grow over time. It can have a huge impact. I mean, the article gives some pretty compelling examples of this. Did you see those?
Yeah, the one that stood out to me was investing $250 a month starting in your 20s and then just letting it ride for 40 years.
Right.
And then ending up with 1.4 million. I was like, no way.
It's mind-blowing.
No.
It really highlights the power of compound interest. I think Einstein called it the eighth wonder of the world or something like that. It's basically earning interest on your interest. So you just let it snowball over time, and it really adds up.
So buying the economy through index funds, okay, I got it. But the next recommendation really threw me for a loop.
Yeah.
They're saying buy a rental property before you buy your own house.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't buying a house the first big thing you're supposed to do?
It's a common assumption for sure. This article kind of challenges that idea, though. They make a good case that rental properties can be a better way to build wealth, especially when you're in your 20s.
So why is a rental property better for a younger person than a house?
It's all about cash flow. So ideally, the rent that you're collecting from a rental property, it should cover all of your expenses for that property.
Okay.
Like mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, even the maintenance stuff. If you do it right, you might even have some money left over every single month. And that's profit.
You're using other people's rent money to build your own wealth.
That's the idea. And then on top of that, when you eventually sell that property, any profit that you made on that sale, that's another big boost to your wealth. And then there's also a lot of cool tax advantages to real estate investing. Like you can actually defer paying taxes on those profits if you reinvest that money into another similar property. I think it's called a 1031 exchange or something like that.
That's pretty sweet. But for someone in their 20s who maybe hasn't saved up a ton of money, how do they even buy a rental property to begin with? I mean, isn't that a huge obstacle?
Yeah, it can be. But the article talks about this concept called house hacking, which is a pretty cool idea. It basically means living in the property that you're also renting out.
Yeah. Isn't that where you buy a duplex or something?
Yeah, that's one way to do it. So you buy a duplex or a property that has a separate rental unit. You live in one part, rent out the other part. And that rent money from your tenant helps you pay your mortgage. So you're basically living rent-free and building equity in the property at the same time.
That is so smart.
Right.
So you're a homeowner and a landlord at the same time.
Yeah. Another way to house hack is you buy a property and you live in it for a year or so.
Okay.
That way you can qualify for a primary residence mortgage, which usually has a better interest rate. And then after that, you can convert it into a rental property.
Wow, so that's a way to get started even if you don't have a ton of money saved up.
Exactly.
But it does sound like a lot of work.
Yeah, it's definitely not passive.
especially for someone in their 20s.
It takes some effort, it takes some planning, but the potential rewards are huge. And there are a lot of good resources and professionals out there who can help you navigate the process. And I think one thing that's important to remember is that real estate, it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's a long-term investment. It takes time. It takes research.
Yeah, you got to do your due diligence for sure.
Right. It's not like flipping houses. You got to think long-term.
Okay, so buying the economy through index funds.
Yep.
Rental property instead of buying a house.
Right.
Got it. What's the third thing on your list?
The third one that really stood out to me was choosing a cheap but reliable car over a flashy status symbol.
Ooh, this is so true. When I was in my 20s, I was like so tempted by all the fancy cars.
It's so easy to get caught up in that, right? Like you want to impress people, you want to look cool.
Yeah, but it can be such a trap financially.
It really can. And the article gives an example of like a luxury car, $88,000 down payment, $500 monthly payments. It's a lot of money, especially for someone just starting out.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I'm already cringing just thinking about those payments.
Right. And if you think about that, over 5 years, those car payments would add up to $30,000.
Jeez.
And that's not even factoring in depreciation. That car is going to be worth way less than that in 5 years.
Yeah, and then the other thing is like 5 years, you're going to want to upgrade anyway.
Of course.
And so then you're stuck in this cycle.
It's a black hole. And think about it. That $500 a month could be invested instead, potentially making you thousands of dollars in the long run. Like with that S&P 500 example we talked about earlier.
It's opportunity cost, right?
Yeah.
Like what could you be doing with that money if you weren't making those huge car payments?
That's exactly it. And it's not to say that you can never have a nice car, but especially in your 20s when you're just starting out, you really want to be strategic about how you're using your money.
So buy something reliable, gets you from point A to point B.
Exactly.
But doesn't drain your bank account.
You got it.
Okay, so buying the economy, rental property, and ditch the fancy car. It's about delaying gratification.
Yeah.
Right? Thinking about the long term.
Exactly. Especially because you have so much time on your side in your 20s.
What else does this article talk about?
Well, there are a couple other purchases that I think were really insightful, and they become even more relevant as you start to earn more money and acquire more assets. And those were protection and buying back your time.
Okay, those sound super intriguing. I'm definitely curious to learn more. Let's dig into those a little bit more in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good to me. All right, so we were talking about some pretty big purchases, right? Investing in the economy, rental properties, even buying back your time.
Yeah, huge stuff.
Laying the groundwork.
So what about those other purchases?
Yeah. So the next two I wanted to touch on were protection and buying back your time.
So those sound like maybe less like specific things to buy and more like strategies.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And they become super important, I think, as you start to earn more money and as you start to accumulate assets.
Okay, so let's start with protection then.
Okay.
What does that mean in terms of like your finances?
Yeah, so it's basically about protecting all that hard-earned money and all those assets that you're building from potential risks and liabilities.
Okay.
So the article talks about things like legal advice and financial advice as your income grows. Having an estate plan in place.
Estate planning? I feel like that's something that people don't think about until they're way older.
Yeah, it definitely has that connotation, right? Like it's for older folks. But the reality is that like unexpected things can happen at any age.
Sure.
And estate planning is really just about making sure your wishes are carried out and your loved ones are protected if something were to happen to you.
So it's not just about having a will.
No, it's more than that.
It's like trusts and stuff.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Like how are your assets going to be distributed, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, as things get more complicated, it can be really helpful to have a good tax advisor on your team because taxes, they can get really complicated.
They're confusing.
Especially if you're a business owner or a real estate investor. Having a tax advisor who knows all the ins and outs and can make sure you're not paying more than you have to, that can be super valuable.
Okay, yeah. So it's like having a financial expert in your corner to help you out.
That's the idea. The other aspect of protection that the article mentions is asset protection. And this is really important if you're investing in real estate.
So like what would that look like?
So let's say you buy a rental property.
Okay.
Instead of owning it just in your own name, you could set up what's called an LLC, a limited liability company.
Okay. Yeah.
And that LLC would own the property. The article actually mentions Just B. Singh, who owns a bunch of different real estate companies, and he has each company own a specific property.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's like you're creating a separate legal entity to protect your personal assets from any potential liabilities.
So if something happens with that rental property and someone tries to sue, they can only go after the LLC's assets.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They can't come after your personal assets.
Okay, that's a smart move.
Yeah, so protection is really about thinking ahead, right? Planning for those what if scenarios and making sure that you and your assets are protected no matter what happens.
So it's like building a financial fortress around yourself.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about this idea of buying back your time?
All right, so this is something that really resonated with me. I think we all feel like we don't have enough time, right?
There's never enough time.
It's such a valuable
So
resource.
how do you buy back your time?
Well, the idea is that as your income increases, you can start to use some of that money to free up your time. So the article talks about things like paying for a house cleaner, paying for someone to mow your lawn, getting your groceries delivered, maybe even hiring a virtual assistant to help with some of those administrative tasks that can just eat up so much time.
So it's about outsourcing, like
Yeah.
taking things off your plate so you can focus on the things that you're good at or that you actually enjoy doing.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it all comes down to understanding the opportunity cost of your time. Do you remember what that is?
It's like what you're giving up when you choose to do one thing over another, right?
Exactly. So for example, let's say your time is worth $30 an hour.
Okay.
If you spend 2 hours every weekend mowing your lawn, you're basically giving up $60. You could have earned that money working, or you could have invested that time in something else.
So if you paid someone $20 an hour to mow your lawn,
Mm-hmm.
you'd actually be coming out ahead because then you'd have those 2 hours to go and make money.
Right, exactly. So it's a shift in mindset. Instead of viewing those things as just costs you start thinking of them as investments in your time and in your well-being.
I like that.
Yeah.
But to be honest, that just sounds like a luxury that most people in their 20s can't afford.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? You can start small. Like maybe you think about one or two tasks that you really hate doing
Yeah.
or that are just huge time sucks,
Uh-huh.
and you figure out a way to delegate those. As you earn more money, then you can gradually expand the areas where you're buying back your time.
So it's like making a time budget, like figuring out where you can make the most impactful investments with your time.
That's a great way to put it. And remember, this isn't about being lazy. It's about being strategic and creating more time for the things that really matter to you.
Like spending time with your family and friends, working on a side hustle, or just taking some time to relax and recharge.
Exactly. Now, are you ready to move on to some of the other recommendations in this article?
I'm ready. Let's see what else they have to say. All right, so we talked about investing in the economy. We talked about rental properties. We even talked about buying back your time.
Yeah, it's a lot to cover.
So what other smart purchases does this article recommend?
Well, this one might surprise you, but they actually recommend investing in books.
Books.
Yeah.
That's not usually what I think of when I think about
Yeah.
investments.
I know, right? But they make a really interesting point about building what they call a mini MBA
Okay.
through reading.
Interesting.
So they suggest picking like 25 books
Okay.
on all different kinds of topics, like personal development, money management, entrepreneurship, leadership, even biographies of successful people.
So like creating your own business school curriculum.
Exactly. It's about gaining knowledge and skills that can help you in all areas of your life,
Uh-huh.
not just your finances.
Yeah, and it's a lot cheaper than going to business school.
Way cheaper.
I like that. What's cool too is they're not just saying read the books and that's it. They're saying you got to take action.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You got to actually implement what you learn.
Knowledge is only powerful if you use it.
Right.
It's like reading a cookbook. You know you're not going to become a chef just by reading a cookbook. You got to get in the kitchen and you got to start cooking.
I like that analogy. So it's about building that financial literacy and that confidence to make smart money decisions.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And just compound interest knowledge compounds over time.
The more you know, the more you can see how it all connects.
Exactly. All right, so speaking of investing in yourself, the article also talks about prioritizing your health.
Okay, so now this is sounding more like the typical treat yourself kind of advice.
Right.
But I bet it's more than that.
It is. It goes deeper than just hitting the gym or, trying the latest fad diet.
Okay.
It's about what they call the quad fit theory.
Quad fit theory, was that?
So it's about developing 4 different types of fitness: physical, mental, spiritual, and financial.
Okay.
So it's about being well-rounded, having balance in your life.
So how do all those things work together?
Well, they're all interconnected, right? So, for example, let's say you're stressed out about your finances.
Okay, yeah.
That stress can really take a toll on your body. You might feel tired all the time, you might even get sick. But if you're taking care of yourself physically, if you're exercising, eating healthy foods, you're going to be better equipped to handle that stress.
Okay, so like it kind of builds up your resilience
Exactly. And on the flip side, having a strong financial foundation can actually reduce stress and improve your mental and emotional well-being.
because you're not constantly worried about money.
Exactly. It all works
It's a
together.
holistic approach for sure.
Okay, so this next recommendation might sound a little weird. They suggest investing in a wedding ring.
A wedding ring. In your 20s,
Oh, right.
even if you're not like even close to getting married.
It sounds crazy, but they're saying it's a way to plan ahead because weddings are expensive.
Yeah, man.
So even if you just start putting away a little bit of money each month, it can really add up over time.
Okay, so it's like thinking ahead to a big expense that you know is probably going to happen at some point.
Exactly. And remember, finding a partner who shares your financial values, that's an investment in itself.
Huge investment.
Right.
Yeah,
You want someone who's going to be your teammate.
absolutely. So what else is on this list?
All right, this next one's a little more literal. They say to invest in things that touch the ground.
Things that touch the ground. I don't even know what that means.
So they're talking about your shoes, your tires, and your bed.
Okay.
These are things that we use every single day, and investing in good quality versions of these things can make a big difference in terms of your comfort, your health, even your safety.
That's true. I never really thought about it that way.
Right. But we depend on our shoes to support our feet. We need our tires to be safe on the road. And we spend a third of our lives in bed.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it's worth investing in a good mattress.
Okay.
All right, so the article also talks about travel, but not just any kind of travel.
Yeah.
It's got to be strategic.
So not just like random vacations.
Yeah, it should be travel that aligns with your interests, that broadens your horizons, maybe even opens up some new business opportunities.
So travel that enriches your life in some way.
Yeah.
Not just like a quick trip to Vegas.
Right, exactly. And then finally, the article talks about just making smart, practical purchases in your everyday life.
Okay.
So it's not about depriving yourself. It's not about being super frugal. It's just about being mindful of where your money is going.
So like little things can make a big difference.
Exactly. They use the example of making coffee at home instead of buying it every day.
Yeah, that adds up for sure.
It's a small change, but over time, it can save you a lot of money.
Okay, so big picture, what are the key takeaways from this article? What do people really need to know?
I think the main message here is that building wealth and freedom in your 20s, it's not just about one thing.
Yeah.
It's about making smart investments, both with your money and with your time. It's about prioritizing the long term over the short term. And it's about designing a life that feels good on all levels.
I love that. This deep dive was super helpful. Lots to think about.
Yeah, I agree. And hopefully it gave everyone some actionable steps they can take.
Absolutely. And remember, this is just the beginning. Keep learning, keep exploring. And on that note, we'll leave you with a final question. If you could buy back 5 hours of your week, what would you do with that extra time? Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.